Welcome to Module 2 in the NPSF Certified Professional in Patient Safety Review course. Each module in this series addresses one of the 6 patient safety domains that are included on the CPPS exam. This module will address the role of leaders in influencing the patient safety culture within a healthcare organization. This material was adapted from a presentation given at the 16th Annual NPSF Patient Safety Congress. The presentation was given by Dan Degnan, Senior Project Manager, Center for Medication Safety Advancement, Purdue University College of Pharmacy, Regina Hoffman, Patient Safety Liaison, Pennsylvania Patient Safety Authority, and Donna Jenkins, Patient Safety Staff Specialist, Edward P. Lawrence Center for Quality and Safety, Massachusetts General Hospital. The content outline for the leadership domain is A. Align patient safety strategy with organizational mission, vision, values, and goals. B. Advocate for patient safety as a top priority. C. Collaborate with key stakeholders to prioritize patient safety efforts. D. Develop operational plan to improve patient safety. E. Advocate for resources required to support operational plan. F. Create opportunities for interdisciplinary patient safety conversations and problem solving. G. Advocate for integration of patient safety responsibilities into job descriptions and performance evaluation tools. H. Embed accountability into investigation and system improvement. I. Demonstrate ability to influence decision makers and frontline staff to participate in patient safety initiatives. And J. Maintain ongoing working relationships with clinicians, managers, executives, governing body, external agencies, patients, and staff. The objectives of this module are 1. Discuss the integration of patient safety into the organization's overall strategy as it relates to its mission. 2. Examine several strategies to operationalize patient safety at the facility level. 3. Discuss how the patient safety professional can advocate successfully for patient safety resources. And 4. Describe ways to influence key stakeholders and engage them in patient safety at an organization-wide level. As we begin, we want to think about leadership in 2 ways. First, think about yourself as a leader in patient safety. Second, think about yourself as a leader who is mobilizing and influencing the other leaders within your organization. And so we divided the topic into 3 groupings: strategies, operationalization, and engagement. We want to talk about how you bring your work toward the mission of the hospital. We're going to examine several strategies to operationalize patient safety at the facility level. We're going to discuss how patient safety professionals can advocate successfully for patient safety resources in a tight economy. We'll also describe ways to influence key stakeholders and engage them in safety at organization-wide levels. Many of you work in an organization where safety is an explicit part of the mission and vision. Additionally, many of you work in an organization where safety is an explicit part of the performance appraisal of your leaders and of the frontline staff. We want to address the fact that safety really does start at the top. It starts with the mission and values of the healthcare facility in which you work. At this point, leadership is the critical element in a successful patient safety program, so you cannot delegate it. It cannot be that the board is not concerned about patient safety, and there is a patient safety officer over here who is now responsible for all the safety in the hospital. You cannot delegate that. Sometimes when you're in the role, you feel like that's what has happened. When you're facing your 19,000 safety reports, wondering how the conclusions of one report is going to fix all these. It's not you, it's the organization. Safety has to start at the board level. Safety has to be seen as a strategic priority for all staff, and leadership has to make it the focus of their attention. NPSF's vision statement is one of the large goals: creating a world where patients and those who care for them are free from harm. And the NPSF mission is: NPSF partners with patients and families, the healthcare community, and key stakeholders to advance patient safety and healthcare workforce safety and disseminate strategies to prevent harm. It's clear what the goal of NPSF is. And we hope each healthcare providing organization also has goals that are this clear. If you go online and randomly look at a variety of mission statements and value statements, you'll find certain keywords and phrases are used frequently. There's a lot of information about providing high-quality care, and we can have a discussion about whether quality and safety are equal, but not necessarily. Another phrase you'll see often is cost-effective, and many of you work in environments where cost-effectiveness is quite an important value. Other phrases that are used often are compassionate, teamwork, and patient-centered. For this example, we looked at 35 hospital mission, vision, and value statements and found only 7 included the word safe or safety. We saw phrases such as restore health swiftly and safely, excel in quality and safety, value safety as a guiding principle, and to deliver the very best healthcare in a safe and compassionate environment. When you're working in an organization that has this mission in their values, you know where safety lies in the organization. So one of the things that these organizations show you is that at the board level, where strategy, mission, and values are set, that becomes a high priority. It's very important that when you're engaging leadership, you consider the leadership of the very top. If we were to go back 10 years or so, the board meetings would not include anything about safety. They wouldn't be hearing the stories of patients or injury. They would be hearing the stories about finances and how we're doing. They would be hearing about what we're worried about, what machines we need to invest in and buy, and what organizations we're partnering with. But now, we're starting to see that the boards are really realizing that safety is a high priority, because it does start as the foundation. One of the things that we start to look at is assessing how the teams are doing. If we don't have safety as the guiding principle of the organization, we might find that we have a lot of disparate safety activities happening. In a large organization, it's not at all unusual to find 4 or 5 groups working on the exact same thing. When you have an overarching guiding principle or centralized way of looking at these things, you start to bring those groups together. We do need to start looking for those hidden pockets of excellence within the organization, because those are the bits and pieces that you want to be able to spread. Once you find these things, it's time to start setting your quality and safety priorities. There are a variety of ways to do that. Some organizations choose the BHAG, the one big, hairy, audacious goal. We want to be the safest hospital on the planet. One big, hairy, audacious goal. Or some organizations and some patient safety officers set their goals by the big events. If you work at a hospital where the local newspaper likes to see you in the headlines, anything that happens is likely to show up on the front page. Another way to look at setting quality and safety priorities is that there may be troublesome trends in patient safety cultures. For example, one of the things we may see in our patient safety surveys is that there's a problem with handoffs and transitions. That's pretty much a universal constant across the safety culture, so that's your troublesome trend, where you want to focus your quality priorities for that particular year. And finally, there's sorting the signals. Your organization may have hundreds or thousands of safety reports per year, the vast majority of which are near misses. But over time, you have to find a way to not be overwhelmed by that number and to figure out what you're going to address. One of the ways you can do that is by setting the priorities through an iterative process. When using an iterative process, one of the things that's helpful is if you have a data hub, a place where all this information comes to. And if you think about where you get your information, it's not just safety reports. It's from the Office of Patient Advocacy, patient complaints, and patient narratives, particularly the qualitative statements that often identify issues that patients have experienced that now need to be investigated. There's the data, the displays, the dashboards, all of these bits and pieces that you need to be able to find. It's sort of a central locus. And once that's done, we identify our themes through qualitative data review, and then everything becomes a major goal. So you have to apply some sort of filter to prioritize. What do we have the bandwidth to work on now? What is it we have to focus on? Once you've taken that information, you vet the goals across the organization. You go back to those groups that helped feed you the information and say, here's what we think you're saying to us about what we should work on this year. Is this what you want? Do you agree? Next, You vet that goal all the way up to the board of directors. Here's what we're thinking. Is this what the hospital needs to look at? Is that correct? Then once you've done that, you're going to figure out what you want to do about it, to start figuring out key tactics for each goal. Then once the goals are approved, you have to figure out the performance metrics. How do we measure success? And then finally, you have to implement and track your progress. One of the things we have a tendency to do when we've set a goal is to make it the goal for that year. And then 2 years later, you find that you're still not meeting the goal you set 2 years ago because you've moved on to another goal. So there really has to be a way of tracking your successes. One of the things we've found that works is really creating a sense of urgency. And this is created not just at the level of the patient safety organization. We feel urgent all the time. I think there are days when you have to say to yourself, after you've read the 96th safety report, that for every one of these you see, there are 1,000 interactions that go well and go right, and patients are doing okay. But you need to transmit that urgency across to the rest of the organization, because the cost of harm is very widespread. There's a human cost, but there's also a financial cost, and there's the cost to the organization's reputation. And one of the ways we talk about doing that is getting to all the various constituencies. You all know who your organization leaders are, but you also know who your informal leaders are. Who are those people you really need to get on your team? Often, the informal leaders are more powerful than the formal leaders within the local culture, within that unit base. So you've got to get them on your side. The Institute for Healthcare Improvement, or IHI, has a great site about getting boards on board, and this talks about what the goal of the board is. It describes the activities that boards must focus on to influence and promote patient safety. This includes 1. Setting aims for harm reduction, 2. Getting data and hearing stories that put a human face on harm data, 3. Establishing and monitoring system-level measures of patient safety that are transparent to all. 4. Changing the environment, policies, and culture to build an organization that is safe, fair, and just. 5. Learning and developing the capabilities of the board in the realm of patient safety. And 6. Establishing executive accountability for the execution of plans to reduce harm. This quote is from Robert Wachter's book, Understanding Patient Safety. It's crucial that each board meeting include at least one story of a patient who was harmed or killed while receiving care in the system. The drama and poignancy of an individual case, a person with a name, face, and family who was seriously injured by an error, provides the energy needed to inspire real action and safety. This is particularly important for boards because they often include lay people. We can talk in our own jargon about what happened in our own hospital, but for the Board of Trustees, you really need to put that face on it. Then you need to take that sense of urgency, move beyond the upper-level management, and get to recruiting and involving the front line. This means gathering information, setting priorities, and following through. If people don't see evidence of follow-through on the safety issues they brought to you, then you won't hear about that next thing. It goes back to that feeling of psychological safety. Why should I tell you if you've done nothing? So it's really important to follow through and get back to them. It is key to not make just yourself responsible for sustaining the gains. Everyone is responsible. It's the organization. It does not live in the Office of Quality and Safety or Risk Management or Compliance. It lives with the staff at that level. So it's important to include quality and safety on every agenda and to start the majority of meetings with a safety story. What's happened on our unit today? What's happened this week? And what are we doing about it? We want to highlight the actions taken at both the local and larger level. Next, we're going to talk about operationalizing the patient safety things we do. In some sense, we should eliminate the phrase patient safety department, because patient safety is not a department, it's what we do. When we talk about operationalizing patient safety, we're not necessarily talking about adding people to the patient safety department. We're talking about incorporating patient safety throughout our organization. What are the things we do to carry our mission and our goals forward? First, we're going to address a couple of things we hear quite often when we talk about the operations of patient safety, some programs that are becoming quite common. Transforming Care at the Bedside was created back in 2003 by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and IHI. That program looked specifically at med-surg units and improving patient safety on those units and improving our staff satisfaction. At the time, med-surg units had some of the lowest employee satisfaction scores compared to the other departments in the hospital. 5 themes that came out of that program were transformational leadership, providing safe and reliable care, vitality and teamwork, patient-centered care, and value-added care processes. In other areas of the hospital, we do a good job with processes like reducing waste in labs. But when you look at nursing processes on the floor, and the waste that sometimes occurs in time and resources that pulls our nurses away from supplying direct patient care, we historically have missed the boat a little there. So this program really focused on reducing waste and improving efficiency and processes at the bedside. The goal was to make sure that nurses were at the bedside and not wasting time running back and forth getting linens from the other side of the unit. Some very early successes came out of that program, which most of us have since deployed in our own organizations. One was rapid response teams. Almost all of us now have some sort of rapid response team in our organizations. Other successes from that program included standardized communication models and professional support systems for continuing education preceptorship for nurses to gain higher competencies at the bedside. We hear about leadership rounding a lot. It's really important to make sure you have the buy-in of people who are going to be doing the rounding. If you're going to implement rounding and you expect your CEO to go out there and round, you have to make sure this is something he or she wants to do. You don't want the leader pushed into doing it because it won't come across as genuine. So make sure you have the buy-in of people who will be rounding. When you talk about leadership rounding, who rounds? Usually, it will be your executive leadership, your CEOs, your CNOs, your COOs, your CFOs, and your quality and patient safety officers. A lot of organizations will have members of the board come and participate in the rounding as well. How often should they do this? Most organizations will do it at least weekly, but look at what works for your organization. Whatever standard you set, make sure you follow it. If your staff expects you to be doing rounding once a week and it's really only done once a month, you're not going to be sending a good message. So if realistically you can only do it once a month, then set that as the expectation. Make sure rounding is done for a long duration. You don't want to implement something like this and make it for a month or 2. We are really talking about a year out. Do you have the long-term commitment to continue to do this? Where are you rounding? It should be done in all patient care areas. And in a perfect world, you should round in every department of your hospital. It doesn't matter whether it's a direct patient care area or not, because all of our departments, either directly or indirectly, reach our patients. And why do rounding? It gives executive leadership an opportunity to find out what's going on in their hospital and what the next thing is that's going to happen. It shows the frontline staff that the executive leadership team is really engaged because they're seeing the leaders on a regular basis. It's important to remember that when you're rounding. If issues are brought up, you need to make sure you're following through on them. Some organizations do a really good job rounding. They're out there every week, and they do surveys of their staff. And one of the questions they ask is about the executive rounding. Sometimes they get low scores, and they say they don't understand this. But if you're only rounding on the day shift and you're surveying the night shift, those people may not see the rounding. Or if you're rounding once a week, think about all the staff. Not everyone is going to have the opportunity to interact one-on-one with the people who are rounding. So you may want to consider putting some sort of communication out after you do the rounding so that staff can read about it. Because if you're scoring yourself on executive rounding, but not everyone is seeing you, everyone needs to know you're doing it. You may want to have a brief memo that comes out once a month so your staff knows you're out there doing it. Because again, it's still a small portion of people you're actually going to talk to. We love safety briefings because they really embed safety into the normal routine. Safety briefings are usually brief huddles done in the morning with representatives from all interdisciplinary departments in the organization. They are not dependent on management. These are going on whether the management shows up or not. So if the manager's off, there's a backup person or frontline staff person facilitating it. It doesn't depend upon the patient safety specialist leading it. Someone is going to step up to the plate, and it's going to happen whether the safety specialist or a manager is there or not. If you want them to be successful, they have to be brief. People can't be away from their units for 30 minutes. At most facilities, they are no longer than 10 minutes. Safety briefings are non-punitive. Of course, you set that groundwork and those ground rules up front. They're structured. Make sure the people and staff who are coming to the table understand what types of safety events they're supposed to bring to everyone's attention. And make sure to note what has been going on in the last 24 hours that is a concern. Then look ahead at what's going on today. What's coming up that could be of concern, and how do we follow up? In organizations that do this really well, they have their daily briefing in the morning, and usually they have a more abbreviated follow-up closer to the end of the day so that issues aren't left until the very end of the day. And it may not be the whole team that comes together, but if there is an issue that has to be resolved and it takes 3 departments to do it that day, they're getting back together before the close of business to say, okay, here's where we are. So you've closed that loop. Next, we're going to talk about process redesign to improve reliability. Reliability means our patients are getting the intended tests, meds, and procedures that they're supposed to at the appropriate time and according to their values and preferences. Make sure you have leadership support because those are the people you'll need to go back to when you have issues with compliance. When you've done all the education and you have that 2% of people who just don't play in the same ballpark as the rest of the team. So make sure leaders support standardization and redundancy. When you look up the word redundancy, it tells you it's something you don't need to do. But if you look at the engineering definition, it says that it means purposefully doing the same thing more than once for critical functions of processes to make our care safer. Human factors engineering design involves making sure we have leadership support for looking at the design. When we're looking at bringing in equipment or new processes, the bottom line is really important. But are we incorporating other elements that are critical for patient safety into our decision-making process? Are we considering things such as human factors design and not just looking at the dollars? Senior executive adopt a work unit. This may be an up-and-coming practice. Basically, with this process, a hospital executive is paired with a work unit for a duration of time so that the staff on that unit become familiar with the executive who's adopted their unit. It helps provide education from that executive and improve awareness of safety issues. It goes both ways. Your staff sees that they are important, and it empowers them to be able to take accountability for safety issues. Suppose you're having an issue in your operating room where your OR staff feel that they can't stop the line because of repercussions from surgeons and anesthesiologists. If the CEO sends the patient safety officer to tell them they can and we're going to support them, do you think that's more or less effective than the CEO him or herself going in and saying that? Some messages are so important that the right person needs to deliver them or they'll lose effectiveness. This creates that high-trust partnership. If the CEO is saying that the circulator has the authority to stop the line if a timeout isn't completed, and the CEO is telling them that directly, the staff is more likely to stop the line. Adopt a work unit can also provide resources and tools. Leadership at this level is important to patient safety, but the other piece of it is the next line down below leadership. When we're talking about staff satisfaction, the most important relationship is with the immediate supervisor. None of these programs are in place of the relationship with the manager or supervisor who is most closely related to the staff on that unit. They are the people that the staff see every day, so they have to have that relationship. So it's not like one or the other. You really need to have both. Advocating for resources is another important operations issue. Most of us didn't go into healthcare to talk about money, but we all know that we have to. As patient safety professionals, we know the clinical side of things. We can make the human case for patient safety, but sometimes we don't always have the skills to talk about the business side of it. And when you're advocating for resources, you are fortunate if you work at an organization that has the resources and deep pockets to implement every practice that needs to be implemented. But many of us are not in that situation today. You know what the finances are like. You may have 10 projects that really need attention, but there is only funding for 1 or 2 or 3, and you really need to make that decision. So when you're advocating for resources, there are a couple things to consider. Look at the project you're working on and think about how it aligns with the organization. Does it align with your mission? Hopefully it does. And where does that fit into the bigger plan? If you're advocating for a project and you can marry it back to the strategic plan, you will have more success getting it through. Another thing to look at is your community needs assessments. Especially if you're a nonprofit today, you have to do a community needs assessments for IRS purposes. So go back and look at that. Where does your plan fit in with the bigger plan? You want to be able to show those pathways to whoever you're talking to. And think about who you need to sell it to. Is it your physicians? Is it your executive leadership? You need to sell to frontline staff, but who do you need to sell it to first? You need to tailor conversations around the people you're talking to. If you need to sell it to finance, do you know how to talk about return on investment? ROI 101 involves looking at your gains or savings divided by the cost and coming up with a number. So if your gain is $40,000 and the implementation cost is $20,000, your ROI is 2.0. The higher that number, the better your return on investment. And if you can talk that talk with your CFO, it's going to make it easier for you. The other piece is, just because you're talking to the finance person, don't leave out the human element. Because they're people too, and their mom or wife was just in your hospital, so don't leave out the human factor just because you're talking to the bean counters. The last item in operations relates to embedding accountability into investigation and system improvement. It's our job as leaders and the job of our leadership team to set the expectation. It's expected that errors and near misses are going to be investigated, that our executives are going to be involved. If you have executives sitting in on the RCA, they don't have to lead it. But having them at the table is a priority, and it helps facilitate your action plan. For example, what if you have an action plan that involves something you want to implement, like a new piece of equipment that costs $500,000? But those resources absolutely aren't there. Isn't it better to know up front before you spend a lot of time saying, here's our action plan? Having the executives there will help ensure that those things get carried out and that it's the priority of patient safety activities and system improvement. Executive dashboards are a way of getting all the things that you do, all of those goals, all of those operational things, back to your board. Make sure you have a dashboard that is easy to use and that includes the indicators that are important. So it should be a mix of clinical indicators, which includes patient safety and quality, and financial indicators. But check the balance between the two. If you have a 10-page dashboard and 8 or 9 are about finance and 1 is about patient safety and quality, you probably need to rebalance it. But when you look at organizations, even when you're talking patient safety and quality to the board, it's still a small piece of the agenda. We talked a bit earlier about engagement, but we're going to address it more fully now. When looking at the objective of how to engage stakeholders, it is helpful to start with a definition. There are 2 definitions, which are actually opposites, and this is unusual. A stakeholder can be a totally disinterested party who historically would be the one who would hold the stakes of people that were betting. They wanted to find someone who was disinterested in the process, who they could trust. That is not the definition we're talking about here. The definition we're talking about is one who is involved or affected by a course of action. When we talk about patient safety and moving forward with strategy and leadership, we're talking about engaging those people who are affected by the processes that we're involved with in patient safety. In 2008 and 2010 and 2012, Gallup did a survey of various organizations, mostly in business, but some in healthcare, and they looked at the level of employee engagement in various industries. They had 350,000 survey responses over 3 years. They did this survey over and over again to make sure they could validate the data from year to year. And the reason they did this was to look at the financial equation associated with engagement. There was some science associated with the idea that if employees were more engaged, they were more likely to have better performance. What they found was that many people were not only not engaged, they were actively disengaged. And one thing that's interesting in looking at the science of engagement is that we can be trying to move forward with patient safety, and not only are people not moving forward with us, but 18% of the people are actively working against us as we try to do this work. So when we are looking at trying to make sure we have an engaged workforce and stakeholders, those who are directly affected by the process, it's important to include the level of engagement. How does this affect patient safety? It seems like something that would be more relevant in a boardroom of a Fortune 500 company. This graph takes the top 25% of respondents versus the bottom 25% of respondents, and it looks at the differences between those two groups. It shows the best performers and lowest performers, and the green bars in the middle are the differences between those two groups. The organizations that had a highly engaged healthcare workforce versus those that had low engagement had a 41% difference in the number of patient safety incidences. That can be meaningful when we are talking about the leadership piece within our own organization and how we would go about making sure we are engaging our staff. One organization that actually did this is Loma Linda Health. They not only did the engagement survey with Gallup, but they also measured their patient safety culture using the AHRQ tool. They wanted to look at the changes that they had in levels of engagement and the changes that they had in the culture of safety. They had a response rate of over 70% on the culture of safety surveys. They found that there was a direct relationship between a highly engaged workforce and the strength of their safety culture. They also found that they had fewer employee injuries with higher levels of engagement. So they measured it over time, and they found that the strength of their safety culture and the level of engagement associated with the workforce meant that they had a better culture, or that they were correlated. How do we improve our engagement of employees or stakeholders? One way is to have senior leader communication of the safety mission and vision. This involves communicating through data and story the importance and purpose of the work that people do each day. One of the things that the Lucian Leap Institute at the National Patient Safety Foundation has included in their report, Through the Eyes of the Workforce, Creating Joy, Meaning, and Safer Healthcare, is the story of Paul O'Neill, who used to be the CEO of Alcoa. O'Neill said that there are three pieces that are important when talking about connecting purpose and meaning. When a supervisor is talking to an individual employee, first ask the question, are you being treated with dignity and respect by everyone? Second, ask, do you have what you need so that you can make a contribution that gives meaning to your life? And third, ask, are you recognized and thanked for what you do? So when we talk about having senior leaders go and be the face of the organization, whatever tool might be involved with senior leader engagement, it's important to have pieces of those three questions as a part of that. Another way to improve engagement is to empower people. Empowering people is something that is cliched and used commonly. However, within the context of stakeholders, it's probably associated with going to a stakeholder and asking them about the work that they do. The world's greatest expert at doing a job is the person who does it, and sometimes that's an important thing to remember. The final way to improve engagement is by listening. We should be listening. One commonly overlooked stakeholder in patient safety can be patients and families. AHRQ has an excellent guide to patient and family engagement. They actually have a how-to book in how to go about doing this. There are 4 specific strategies outlined within the reference. One is to use patients and families as advisors. This is probably becoming more commonplace, and some of you probably have that as part of your daily operating procedure. As part of the patients and families being involved in patient safety, communicating to improve quality is important. Sometimes we communicate and we forget the second part about improving quality. That's the purpose of communicating with patients and families. Nurse bedside shift report is a third way to improve engagement. And the final way is ideal planning. Ideal stands for including the patient, discussing, educating, assessing, and listening. We've talked about how to engage, but let's talk about influencing others to action within a facility or within your organization, and the power of story. Stories are the way that humans have been communicating with each other since the beginning of time. Stories are able to capture the context and emotions of important cognitive events. They encapsulate into one compact package information, knowledge, context, and emotion. In Don Norman's book, Things That Make Us Smart, one of the concepts he talks about is how humans have become reliant on machines. These machines are effective at crunching numbers, but in this age of big data, human empathy and storytelling have become even more significant. So when we talk about communicating or influencing others to action, the power of story is an important component of that. One of the landmark pieces when we think about the concept of human empathy is a 2001 JAMA piece by Dr. Rita Sharon that calls for a new approach to medicine that she called narrative medicine, and that is to transition from the practice of asking the patient to tell me where it hurts to instead saying, tell me about your life. What it does is provide context around that patient to give you complete information, and it allows for engagement of that patient. Included on the slide is a quote from that article. Physicians need the ability to listen to the narratives of the patient, grasp and honor their meanings, and be moved to act on the patient's behalf. Thank you for listening. This concludes Module 2.